NWP Radio.
You're listening to NWP Radio, a production of the National Writing Project.
NWP. NWP Radio.
Howdy, howdy, howdy. Happy October, y'all. And that was a Louisville, Kentucky, y'all, as opposed to a Louisville, Mississippi, y'all, which will make more sense as we congregate this evening in celebration of language, the outdoors, Write Out, and several other national writing project initiatives. I'm Brian Ripley Crandall, co-host of The Right Time, the show being hosted here, and the months leading up to winter, which we are in right now, are my favorite in Connecticut. Why? Not only do we record more episodes of The Right Time, we also bring friends across the country together to celebrate the National Day of Writing on October 20th and to applaud tremendous collaborations, including the month-long celebration participation with Write Out. This year, with a focus on poetry for the planet. And I'm being corrected. It's Louisville or Lawville or Louisville. I'm going to let him say it. In Louisville, Kentucky. I said it many different ways. And you know, when you go to Louisville, it's Louisville, Lawville. Everybody has a different pronunciation. So we will let you be the authority of how to say the city, town, place that you live. I am in the studio once again with my co-host, Tanya Baker, Executive Director. And I have to ask her right now, what's been poetic on the West Coast these days?
Well, it was super hot last week, Brian, and I did not love that, but the temperature has dropped. I have about 1 million quail running around in my yard, and the fog, which has its own name in San Francisco, we call him Carl. The fog has been particularly gorgeous around sunset these days, so I'm really excited that Write Out's coming and that I'm getting this sort of natural playing out every day. As to this show, though, and the time I get to spend with you and amazing people in the studio, we're super fortunate to have poet Jermaine Thompson as a featured writer for tonight's program and teacher, leader, scholar Rich Novack, who has been central to the National Writing Project's Write Out for several years. All of us across the network recognize the importance of place, outdoors, the power of words, and the joy of imagination, the material writers need to capture the everyday. Tonight's show brings together two voices for the 2024 Write Out theme, Poetry for the Planet. We are once again delighted to celebrate Write Out on The Right Time. Our video podcast has been bringing teachers, writers, and dreamers together for the past 4 years. We're excited to have you, Jermaine and Rich, and welcome you to the show.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Awesome, right? So born in Louisville, Mississippi, Jermaine Thompson learned language from big-armed women who greased their skillets with gossip and from full-bellied men who cursed and prayed with the same fervor. He's been writing poetry since he was 13, inspired by having to memorize Langston Hughes' Harlem for a Black History program at his Presbyterian church home. Jermaine loves language for what it creates, what it destroys, what binds in heaven, and for what it loses on earth. Jermaine earned his MFA in poetry from the University of Missouri, Kansas City in 2018, and he currently teaches 9th through 12th grade humanities at Build Up Community School in Birmingham, Alabama. We love our Birmingham, Alabama. He has publications in the Pinch, Memorious, Whale Road Review, Southern Indiana Review, and New Letters. In his spare time, he enjoys word games, live entertainment, and buying statement hoodies, which, what are you wearing tonight? Woo! There you go. Woo!
Oh, Rich, you've got yours on too, right? You have a statement
is
hoodie
right
on
out.
as well. Very nice. Jermaine, I just, my grandma's from Birmingham, Alabama, and those descriptions of your elders and ancestors made me think so much of my own that I knew that we're going to be friends. You might not know it yet, but I'm sure of it.
I'll have more friends.
It's my pleasure to introduce the teacher interviewer for tonight's show, Rich Novack. For 20 years, Rich Novack has been teaching 10th grade English in Connecticut at Fairfield Ward High School. He also teaches first-year writing part-time at Fairfield University as a member of the award-winning core writing program. His forthcoming book chapter, Eco-Criticism as a Frame for Teaching Climate Change in High School English, in the anthology, Empowering Youth to Address the Climate Crisis in the ELA Classroom, introduces teachers to the literary theories of eco-criticism as a frame for pedagogy. In 2021, he earned a PhD from Teachers College, Columbia University. From 2018 to 22, Rich served as the co-chair of the Elate Commission for Climate Justice Inquiry and Action. He continues supporting initiatives that bring issues of climate justice to English classrooms, blending outdoor pedagogies with literacy development. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you. Thank you.
Rich, I'm going to turn it over to you. Now, listeners, if you are here and you are moved by Rich's prompt, we suggest you press pause and do a little writing. But for tonight, we're just going to introduce this idea and then go on to our interview.
Thank you. Jermaine, we're going to start off the way we do at the National Writing Project. We often start with a prompt. Here it is. Think of a place that's special to you. Now focus on what is natural to this place. An animal, a plant, a built structure. Be observant and curious. How could a natural element of that space and place be characterized in a poem?
Awesome. All right, Brian and I are going to disappear. We're going to take down these slides so that you can see each other's faces large, and so can our audience, and enjoy your conversation.
All right, thank you. So, Jermaine, you are a poet who teaches, which is just amazing, inspiring. And, you know, as a poet who then is in the classroom, I'm just wondering, how did these two worlds come together for you?
Well, I was a poet first, and teaching came much later. So I think I've been a poet since, like I said in my bio, age 13 or so. Teaching, I think, came when I was forced to find a job after undergrad. I kind of took a, I guess, detour. I didn't have any like a place after undergrad, so I went back home to Louisville, Mississippi. I was loafing around the house. My mom said, "You got to find a job." So I became a long-term sub at my old high school. And in that environment, I was like, I could do this job. So I got certified, and the next year I was in a classroom in a couple of towns over. I've been teaching at some capacity on some level ever since 2005. So
that's fast. I'm the teacher who wants to be a poet, and you did it the other way. It's that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Now with the write out, as I said, I'm gonna give props to my shirt as much as possible. I'm loving the merch. One of the big ideas behind it is just getting outside and writing, and we've been doing that for years. And as I was saying in the prompt, place is so important to this, and your poetry certainly plays a lot with place. We're gonna have you read one of those in a minute, but I'm just wondering before we get there, if we think about place as a reservoir of human experiences and memories and culture, how do you find your poetry intersecting with place?
One of my ambitions with my work is to always honor where I come from. Also, I want my poetry to, resonate with people I grew up with, those who raised me, those who poured into me. So I'm going to always call upon those images and touch points and the iconography of my, rural upbringing. That those have been pretty fruitful, I would say, so far in building out poems. But I can't write a poem without, giving some nod or wink to, my grandparents, mini gardens, or my mother's elephant ears she planted in the front yard, or my aunt's green thumb, or just the lightning bugs in the backyard in summertime. So all of those things populate me, and there's no poem without those things.
As you're talking about family and lightning bugs, it's almost like they're so simpatico. And I think of place very much the same way. In the South, I know place is really, really important to a lot of the dwellers, but up north too, I find the same thing. Place has all these little touchstones, and I think it's interesting the way in the poem witness statement, you give place real characters. You really
Mhm.
turn place into characters. Would you mind reading that for us?
All right. This poem, Witness Statements, is a both elegy and ode to three um, people who were killed extrajudiciously by the police: Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. The epigraph it repeats for each stanza, and it's a biblical allusion to a verse about stones crying out. Witness statements. And Jesus said, "If the people are quiet, the stones will cry out. But when the stones are busy, Chicago Avenue speaks on behalf of George Floyd. I've carried him home before, but not never like this. I was familiar with the height of him, but never his length or breadth, until that Monday they laid him on me, pressed him so full against me. I felt he was my child, hiding behind my knee, afraid of what the world had ready for him. Lord knows I wished I could have been more forgiving. I wished I could have cracked open, made myself soft as the seats in the M class they drug him out. The way our cells left no room for air made me wish I could magic myself to be the bosom of his lover, made me conscious of what it is to want but can't have. When he called out, Mama, Mama, an old time feeling ran cold down my back. Folks coming north and wanting to believe it was just Mississippi. But everybody knew about Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana. Now everybody knows about Minnesota. Goddamn. And Jesus said, if the people are quiet, the stones will cry out. But when the stones are busy, the night speaks on behalf of Breonna Taylor. You damn right I'm upset. Was it? No, not. And I got a right to say how I get used. Haven't felt like myself since. I don't stay out as late. I come in early. I blame myself. I do. If I wasn't so dark, if I could have had the whole thing rain curtained or had a tinge more twinkle and some white up on the walls, maybe they would have seen and remembered their childhood, considered her childhood, that he was all somebody's child once needing a full moon to close our eyes to. I never agreed to be used that way, and ain't I got a say in how I get used? Wasn't, no, not. They used my color as a shield for their blood, teeth, and hound torch, and when all that muzzle flash lit me up, all I felt was meanness and mist. And Jesus said, if the people are quiet, the stones will cry out. But when the stones are busy, the wind speaks on behalf of Ahmaud Arbery. All this here is mist, a chasing, like how he saw the burn of me in his lungs, like how I loved being at his back, the churn and perfume of his form, like the God I served moved daily through me. You saw the chasing, how they hemmed him in, how I tried to speed his heels toward some dark safety. You saw the after, how they made me recite the sound of the shots, made me spread the bullet blown blood, blew me out his chest. Look, here, you can see how I held his mist. I've carried him home before, but never, not never like this.
Wow, that's powerful. Thank you. I've read this so many times, but hearing you read it right now, I really have chills. That was a beautiful reading.
Thank you.
That the mist, the wind, and Chicago Avenue, you really give them agency, don't you?
I tried to at least. Yeah.
It's really interesting to think about how place can serve as a part of poetry in a way that has voice.
Mhm.
This is something that's really important in eco-criticism. I really am into this. If there's feminism, there's also eco-criticism. It's kind of a new theory. And
Hmm.
they're into this idea of, how nature can have agency. And it's an interesting way. And I know as a teacher myself, I go to place as a way to touch on these challenging moments in history.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm wondering, how do you intersect challenging history with both your poetry and or your teaching?
Yeah, I think for me, just trying to find a way into this poem, I didn't want to just depend on, although the poem does depend on like mediated images we all saw around these three tragic deaths. I think I had just read Jericho Brown's The Tradition, and how he used the pastoral to a degree as a way to challenge um, one, the pastoral tradition, but also just challenge what poems can do. Also, recently had the opportunity to teach a eco poetry workshop, and I used Ross Gay's "A Small Needful Act" as one of the poems that kind of led me toward this way of using nature as a political lens. I strongly believe living in Birmingham has definitely reified this for me, reiterated this for me, is that the place will outlive whatever happened there, but it still holds all of that history. Like one of
Mm,
the things that's happening here is Birmingham is one of the icon of the civil rights movement as far as historical places to visit, as far as you want to see some civil rights history coming to Birmingham. But the city is actually really dedicated to trying to say we're not a museum, we're not a dead place, we are a place that's moving forward. But within all of that, there's a consideration that this also is a place that is rife with history upon history upon history. So for me, it's just the logic of the fact that the trees have the stories, the land itself has the stories, um, the place will always hold the story. And how do we tap into those places to get those stories out is something I think I'm working toward in my work now.
and you do. It really it resonates. I think it's powerful. You think of Edmund Pettus Bridge, you think of all these
Mhm.
places that,
Yeah.
are part of history, but and then when you see them in person, you see that story and it never looks the same as on TV. But I
Right,
think
right, right.
in poetry, it's doing something more than what TV does to these places. Like poetry elevates it somehow to something, almost and there's a lot of spirituality in your poetry too, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. I was born and bred in the church on both sides of the family, all sides of the family at all times. So there was yeah, Sunday, Wednesday, Saturday. Yeah, so that's again, that is in my bones. So and that language was, I think, well, I'll have to say definitively what was the first poetry I ever was in contact with. Spirituals, hymns, scriptures, those are all poetic in their own way. So always trying to bring that language forward with me, and making it, my own, but also being honoring the sources is, I guess, one of my bags of tricks that this poet has.
Mm. Well, another bag of tricks you have is the structure. The way
Yeah.
you structure things. This poem, we're gonna definitely be sharing it on our social media platforms and write out so people will be able to see it. But in
Hmm.
several of your poetries, you're playing a lot with different structures. In another
Hmm.
poetry, you're using that forward slash, the
Yeah.
way you writing in prose, which is fascinating. But in this poem, you have the epigraph in italics on one side, but then you
Hmm.
have the main text on the right.
Hmm.
So how do you play with structure? How do you play with choices for structure? What is I had a professor who used to kind of laugh at the idea that there's meaning in structure in poetry, but we would
Oh, terrible professor. That was a bad professor.
yeah, I mean he was actually very more structuralist than he sounds too. That's the funny thing. How do you play with structure in poetry?
Well, I had some great professors at Mississippi State and at UMKC, and luckily we all believed that the structure everything on the page matters. Every comma you place, every period where you put the indentations, it all matters. It informs the poem in some way, and it informs the audience to some capacity as well. Not I am one of those poets who took all those theory and criticism classes very seriously. So I'm always thinking about how can I make sure the poem can't be misinterpreted, which is a large task. But how can I help the reader or the audience as much as possible understand what I'm trying to do and communicate through the work? And the use of white space, I think, is one of those tools. I always want the figure of the poem to inform how it should be read, especially with line breaks, especially with poems that move across the page. I think the one you're referring to is like a when Michael Jackson moonwalks the sun, he channels Gil Scott-Heron and moonwalks the sun. That one kind of like waves across the page because it's Michael Jackson and he moves flowingly across the stage. So it's like I'm trying to always um, secure some meaning with structure that the audience can interpret. Because I also consider if someday I'm lucky enough to be read in classrooms, right? And a teacher says, analyze this poem. I want as many things in there that the kids or students or anybody can analyze and feel fulfilled by after reading one of my works.
My students are going to read your poems. Okay, number one. I'll make that. We're going to make that happen. All right. I teach 10th grade. This is great because I want to take it to the classroom now because so many
Yeah.
teachers just stay in structure land, right? And I'm sure
Mhm.
there's so much. I agree. There's so much fun you can have with it. Playing with structures. In fact, your poetry inspired me to really play with. I went on a hike and I've been working on things with structures and using Google spreadsheets. But anyway,
Yeah.
this is what I want to know. So when you're in the classroom, what's a
Mhm.
good lesson you use to bring out structure out of your students' writing?
Let's see. I've taught pastoral poetry. I just show them examples of what poems can be and do, like definition poems or concrete poems. Sonnets, they're like, they're very, strict in 14 line and whatnot. But then there's the American sonnet that says there are no rules. Just give me 14 lines. There's no rhyme scheme. There's no iambic pentameter. Just give me 14 lines and have to rhyme at all. I try to always present a diversity of poetry to my students. So they're not thinking about it just has to be this one Shakespearean way or John Milton way, is he a poet? Or use some contemporary living poets. Like today, a student of mine who I didn't know, she's been writing and she brought me a poem of hers about love and how it's, can be addictive, right? And I helped her with some language in that poem about, to lean more heavily into the language of addiction in this poem. And like she went up to her desk and came back with two more pages of the poem. I was like, that is awesome. I commend you. High fives. All right. But mainly the way to inspire students about structure or teach them about structure to show them all the things that poets are doing, or even within one volume of poetry, show them all the ways poets present their poetry within one work itself. Um, I think some of the best poets play with structure and not just stick to one. It has to be all left aligned and yeah, single stanza and yeah, I think even E. Cummings, like one of the early, foundational people, just all lowercase, or a leaf falls, that all of that shows students, this variety and the non-limitations of what a poem and poetry can be.
One of the structures that I know teachers love to play with, and it's an easy in for students too, is things like alliteration,
Mhm.
and that sound in poetry is important. I saw in an earlier interview that you did with I don't even know, I think it was a public radio affiliate down in Alabama. You were talking
Okay.
about sound,
Mhm.
and I'm wondering, tell us more about what sound does in connection with structure in your poetry.
Well, for me, again, growing up in the church, and my dad was as a side hustle, was a DJ. We had crates of records in our house. He had turntables, the ceiling tall PV speakers and whatnot. Being always surrounded by music and knowing that poetry began as an oral art, not a page art. Um, Sonics are always important to me because I want a a sonic auditory experience as well when I read these out loud. I know some poets think just the page is enough and how I put it on the page is fine. And I want to say there was one writer in his Nobel speech said that reading out loud has nothing to do with the poetry on the page. I can't remember which one it was. But for me, it's the exact opposite. I think how I edit and revise my poems is by reading them out loud and seeing where either more sound can be or sound can be taken out. So for me, sound is a very important vehicle for poetry.
I totally agree with you. I have a lesson where whenever we read poetry, I say we have to read it. It must
Well,
be said.
absolutely.
I
Read it
always thought,
twice.
yeah. You have to read it out loud, though. I mean, you have to hear
Right.
it, and you have to. And I get the students up, but I hearken back to those old days of oral traditions. Absolutely,
Mhm.
like that's what it is. It's the original poetry was said, right?
Right.
And now your recent award as a the Southern Exposure Film Fellow for
Hmm.
the Alabama River Alliance
Hmm.
is putting together your poetry with
Hmm.
visual in a documentary film you made. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It was a great opportunity. They reached out to me and said, "Do I want to do an eco poem?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." Um, but the experience was unforgettable. I would do it again in a heartbeat. But part of that experience was understanding that I have been and I am in some ways an eco poet. I just didn't realize it. Growing up in the South, I have a connection to the land. Done all the natural things. I've gone camping. I've fished. I've gutted fish. I've shut corn. I've shelled peas. All those things that you know. Oh, I've picked peas as well. I've done the hog killings. I've carried the meat to the smokehouse. I've seen food come from the pen to the plate within a few hours. So tapping into all of that, you know, natural experience, and then understanding, oh, I am this. I can do this, and I appreciate what nature has given me in my entire life. So I'm gonna try to give this thing back to nature. And I had gone on a river walk at the Cabo River with another group earlier that summer. So that some of that's in the poem as well. I hiked one of our wonderful conservation spaces here called Ruffner Mountain. It used to be a iron ore mine, and now nature has reclaimed it. But there's still like a railroad track up there from them transporting, you know, the iron ore down here to downtown. So um, Sloss refining factory. But
And that's in
yeah,
the video, right? That's in that video.
that's in the video. Yeah. But trying to honor nature and give nature a voice that maybe nature hasn't had. Because I know here in Alabama, they pride themselves on not spending money on conservation. There's no official EPA here, so the ARA and other organizations like it are the ones who are trying to conserve Alabama for the future as far as nature goes. But as far as the poem goes, I tried to put all those skills in there. There's a little bit of gospel, a little bit of scripture, definitely sound to make the especially the sound of water and wings flapping, and it's a structural, it's a definition kind of taxonomy in its organization as well. So it's fun poem to write. I've heard it's pretty good, and I encourage everybody to go find it and
You know,
experience it. Yeah.
we're going to be sure to share that video with the writing project community and write out. But you know, the other thing, just you are a real ambassador of Alabama. I mean, you know, people need to listen to you. I've never been to Alabama, but I'm telling you, when I do, I'm calling you, and we have to go for a hike because I want to. I when I go to a place, I need to talk to a local. I need to hear stories. I mean, absolutely. So if you one day get a call or something and it's fine to say no, I get this, you want to be the first, the last, to say no, but I'm going to give you a call because I want to hear it firsthand in person because it really, there's beauty, there's tension. I want to go to Alabama right now.
I'm glad you want to, but I can't take credit for my ambassador to Alabama. I am a transplant. I've only been here not quite 2 years yet, but I know some great people. My girlfriend lives here, and she's a pretty important person in the state. Um, Yeah.
Wow. So then where
Yeah.
would you be an ambassador for? I mean, or where's your,
I
like,
am a tangential ambassador to Alabama's beauty. I like to love the places I live. I'm an ambassador for Kansas City as well as my, small hometown, Mississippi. I'll talk about its greenery and its lakes and its fantastic football team, who's won, I think at this point, 14 state championships. Uh, So I like to love the places I live and find beauty in where I am because as a poet who's a sensory being, I have to be connected and I have to have some natural feeling about the place in order to, continue to work in that space. Finding things to love is often not very difficult, especially as a Southern boy myself. So.
and you're celebrating it, but you're also not afraid to get critical
Oh,
about,
not at all.
right?
Yeah.
And that's teaching in 2024, teaching in 2018. I mean, it's
Hmm.
been rough to
Hmm.
be bringing up these topics. And I'm wondering, and we talked a little bit about how we use place to get there. But what are your thoughts about teachers teaching social justice? And, where do
Hmm.
you bring poetry? Like, what do you think about that?
So, any of my students will probably tell you I don't shy away from it. Like, the first lesson that I taught last year to all four of my class was about whiteness, and double consciousness, internalized racism, Orientalism. I talk about all those things in my courses because if we're going to talk about the literature of also the West and the East dynamics, if we're going to discuss the literature of a place, let's understand what created that place. If we're going to talk about, American lit, we have to understand how America was crafted and created, the ideology behind the psychology of the American psyche. So yeah, we in Thompson's classes, we don't shy away from any issue. And I have that freedom in most respects because school I teach at now is kind of a charter slash private school, but it's also public. It's a strange dynamic, but we do all the things. So anybody can come. It's free. But yeah, my I think my duty as an educator is to prepare kids for the world they're going to enter into. And they must know the world that they've inherited. And it's not fair to me to send out into the world not knowing these things, even if they don't use them again ever. They're gonna in some way be better equipped to address what they see. For example, like today, student from last year, I taught Afrofuturism to my freshmen last year who are sophomores now. And a kid goes, "Hey, Mr. Thompson, is Saturn an Afrofuturist song?" And I was like, "Absolutely. Now tell me why you think it is." Uh, I began with post-colonialism, and everything we read from that point is through that lens. The students take to it like ducks water because it's their lived experience. I mean, I'm only giving them the language to now craft or control their environment by giving them these tools. So I don't shy away. For anyone who's wondering how to do it, just do it. Uh,
Mm.
Forgiveness later. Ask for forgiveness later. Don't ask for permission. Yeah.
You
So
you are truly, you understand the writing project too. Like that's one of the reasons why I love the National Writing Project. They absolutely do not shy away from it. In fact,
yeah.
it's a place where I find sanctuary.
Hmm.
And all that work that you're saying, absolutely. Not only do I agree with you, but I know just the Writing Project Network agrees with you too. And I mean, you're here. We're working together. We're doing it. And I think teachers will see this and you're inspiring them. But there's real challenges out there.
I
Um,
understand. Yeah. Yeah. I think for those people who are in places, this I also teach a adjunct at the university here, and my course is called Political Bodies. And again, it's about Americanness, looking at American history literature, right? And one student I mentioned, I think Toni Morrison in our last course on Tuesday, and he mentioned that she was banned in Atlanta to be read, and that saddened me. Um, And I don't have answers for how to get around like thinking Toni Morrison, except for she is a literary icon and she should be taught. If you can't teach Beloved, teach Song of Solomon or her essays or a Nobel Prize speech. Find a way to get her into the classroom. And um, I found that if you just give students the lens to look at something through, they'll ask the right questions. You don't have to go in saying, we're going to read this because it's about, racism, or it's about, the how America is, an unjust country. You can just give it to them and have them read it and say, what questions do you have about it? And there's the fodder for the lesson there. So
And a lot of times place helps with the lens, right?
right.
Sometimes the lens comes out, you can read the scholarship, but sometimes place is the lens that brings that out of students just as well. I've seen that a lot of times. And that reminds me, you worked with a science teacher once on the pastoral poetry. And by the way, I love the pushback on the pastoral poetry. That's
Mhm.
very much in keeping with the traditions of eco-criticism, where we're going to talk about these traditions of, for example, I always talk about how, we have these lawns in our front yard, and that's just part of this pastoral tradition. That's a little problematic,
Mhm.
and
Right.
maybe redesign lawns. But tell me about that science teacher collaboration.
Well, that was with our teacher last, Miss Montez. She's an awesome person in dental school right now. But it was basically we went to do a collaboration. She was teaching photosynthesis and pollinators, and I was teaching pastoral poetry. So we took the kids to our garden here in the city. We have botanical gardens. We did some picture taking. Asked the kids if they were a flower, what kind of flower they would be. And why did you pick that flower? Is it because that flower is like, resilient, or it likes to sleep? um, and then they brought those ideas back to class. I had taught, a pastoral poetry unit using Black pastoral poets, mainly from the book Black Nature. I want to say, I think Camille Dungy maybe edited that. Um, and I got some great projects. And the assignment was basically here are the parameters pastoral poetry does. Write your poem. We'll do two drafts. We'll do a first draft and a second draft. First and final. I will see two drafts. You can do as many as you want. I'm only going to look at your first draft and your final draft. I'll give you feedback on the first draft. And then you explain to me the tools you use in that poem. Do you use simile, metaphor, imagery? And explain why you use those tools. And it was a very worthwhile project. And I think the kids, some of them surprised themselves. They actually are poets. And that's like demystifying the idea of what poetry is and who can write and who can participate in it.
So you have them unpack what they did as a way
Absolutely.
that's your assessment strategy in a way.
Writing the poem, and then you analyze your own poem instead of analyzing someone else's. You tell me why you made these choices, and now we can go to the next step. Here's someone else's poem. What do they do? And that's how you get into like a deeper analysis of other people's work.
I'm doing that next week. I'm right there. I'm telling you. That's brilliant.
We
Yeah.
popped
Yeah.
we popped in because of the time, but we did want to give you, Rich, one more question. If you had another dying question that you wanted to ask them,
Um,
the fascinating conversation, and we're excited.
Amazing.
This is brilliant for Write Out, but we know we have to. All good things must come to an end. Yeah, so
so just to, in the spirit of keeping it real, how can we inspire teachers to bring tough topics to classrooms through poetry?
Yeah. Um, I think the world is so full of tough topics. It shouldn't be that difficult because my kids come to me every day with some question about what's happening in the world. I think it's up to us to figure out how to get into a lesson. Last year, I know we discussed Israel and Palestine for like the entirety of that encouragement war because we're reading Animal Farm about propaganda, and my seniors were just all over is this propaganda? Is what they just said propaganda? Or is this thingification even? So I think it's up to us to be open to the children's curiosity and allow that curiosity to inform our instructional content.
that's good.
Right. Yeah.
Nice.
So I just want you to know, Jermaine Thompson, that while you were speaking and doing the interview, I told you it got cold here in Connecticut.
Yes.
Outside my window has been the most spectacular northern lights. It's the first time
Oh,
I've
that is happening tonight.
in
Yeah.
Connecticut. And I mean, I'm just like watching purple and blues and pinks flash above. And I was like, oh, look, the great whatever is putting off fireworks for our poet tonight. This is wonderful.
Nice.
Just want you to know that like I want to take your ecological poetry workshop. I want to study with
Hey,
you.
come through.
Um, I love I love that you begin with a post-colonial lens because that is the lens to me as well. And I really love that you said we need to give our students the language tools to survive in their own environments. That is
Hmm.
teaching. That is teaching,
Hmm.
giving them the skills to help them go out into the world and be productive, but also safe, right?
Hmm.
That's a huge four-letter word that we're thinking about right now.
Hmm.
I know that Rich has a closing out prompt to get us writing some more with this conversation. So I'm gonna let him read that, and then I'm gonna talk to Tanya a little bit about closing out the show, eh?
Sounds good. Yeah. So this prompt will flow right in from our conversation. Absolutely. Teachers think about this. Here we go. What social justice and or environmental issue, global or local, near or far, might young writers in your classroom wish to write about? How might such issues be addressed in your classroom, resulting in poetry and verse?
Yeah, I think this generation, it all resonates with them. I think poetry is a great solution for emancipation and freedom.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, dear Tanya,
Yeah, Jermaine and Rich, thank you for such a rich conversation, both about particular poems and about teaching, but also about how poems are made and what they can do. Jermaine, I'm going to take that phrase with me for sure. I think that's really enough to set young people on their paths. I also am holding in my heart this idea that the places we live will change, but they hold the history and the things that happened in them, and that young people resonate with the work you're doing. You said because it's their lived experience, and I was writing down, yeah, if we prepare them for the world that they're going to inhabit by letting them know that it's not just magical that it happened this way, but that, you know, it was built and we can rebuild it or change it. Those two ideas are really powerful. I think I'm taking them with me from tonight's conversation. So thank you both. Thank you, Brian, for being my co-host and getting into all this good kind of trouble that we like to get into here.
Good
And it's
trouble.
always my last job to thank our listeners and to let them know that they can sign up for the Right Now newsletter so that they never miss an episode of The Right Time. They can also join the studio if they want to continue these conversations about Jermaine's work, see Jermaine's video, or do participate in Write Out. And that if you somehow lose this and you want to share it with other people, you'll always be able to find it at the bit.ly NWP radio. So thanks everybody for a great night. It's less than a week till Write Out starts. And Jermaine, thank you for being our Write Out Poet Ambassador this year.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having
You're
me.
listening to NWP Radio, a production of the National Writing Project.
NWP. NWP Radio.